Welcome back to another installment of the Homeschool Solutions Show. My name is Wendy Speak, and I am one of the many hosts we have here on the podcast. Each week you'll hear from one of us, inviting one of our friends to join for a conversation about this busy, blessed season as we educate our children at home. Now, the title of the show is Homeschool Solutions. While we don't have the answer to every question, we know that all the solutions to every stress and every struggle can be found in the person and presence of Jesus Christ and His living and active and applicable Word. We are so glad that you're here for today's conversation. But before we start the show, I'd like to thank our sponsors. MediShare, an affordable and biblical healthcare alternative. Find out more at mychristiancare.org for their ongoing support of homeschooling families just like ours. And Operation Christmas Child. Now more than ever, children need hope. As the world struggles with the coronavirus pandemic, we want to let them know that God loves them and has not forgotten them. The best way to get involved is to pack a shoebox yourself. As you specially select each item, packing a shoebox becomes a blessing to you as well as the child who receives it. Be sure to include a note and a photo. If packing a traditional shoebox just isn't an option for you this year, we can do it for you. Build a shoebox online. You can find out more at SamaritansPurse.org/OCC. And now, on to today's show.
Hi, I'm Janice Campbell, and today I'm here with Brian Wasko to talk about reading, writing, and the reason that good, solid communication skills make everything easier. But first, let me tell you a bit about Brian. After majoring in English and education, Brian taught high school English in public and private Christian schools. In 2001, he founded WriteAtHome.com, an online service offering tutorial writing courses to homeschoolers. He also teaches online literature courses through Wasko Lit, and he has been a popular homeschool convention speaker since the early 2000s at conferences across the country, which is where I first met him. Brian and his family live in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and they homeschooled their 4 daughters from kindergarten to college. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Janice.
I'm glad you could be with us today. And I didn't realize that you had 4 daughters until I looked at your biography. We had 4 sons.
Wow. Should have met earlier. We could have.
I know, seriously. So, as you know, books form a large portion of our lives. Both of us. I think we're both English majors. And since we're doing this interview on Zoom, we both have a large backdrop of books. And so we're going to talk about books and writing. And the first thing I'd like to ask you is if there is a book or a couple of particular books that have made an impact on your thinking or way of life at any age.
Great question. And the answer is, of course. I certainly wouldn't be an English teacher in the world of English education if that was not the case. So the problem, of course, is which books to choose to talk about because so many books have influenced my life over the years. I'll begin, though, with probably the book that turned me into an English teacher. I've said that many times over the years. I actually have one here, a version of it here. It's probably no surprise to a lot of people, but it's, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. So my story was, I was a 7th grader, in middle school in South Jersey. And I had this fantastic English teacher who was full of energy and enthusiasm, and he was hilarious and engaging, and all the kids loved this guy. And Mr. Lang was his name, I believe. And he would teach grammar using sentences that he invented, would write on the chalkboard, and they always involved elves and hobbits and goblins and orcs and all these crazy imaginative figures. And after a while, students started asking him, Mr. Lang, where do you get these crazy sentences from? And he said, I do this because my favorite books are Lord of the Rings by J.R. Tolkien. And he would just start telling us about how great this imaginative world was. And so I started reading the books in seventh grade because of Mr. Lang. And I talk about those as the years I lived in Middle Earth. I read The Hobbit and the whole trilogy. And then I started back with The Hobbit and read the whole trilogy and started back. I did it 3 times through. And at an age when I was a very slow reader. So it literally was probably a full calendar year that I didn't read anything other than Lord of the Rings. But it was the first time that I felt really gripped by a work of literature. And then oddly, I became a Christian after that, where I came to faith in my first year of high school through an outreach at my high school. And those were the years of Dungeons and Dragons, when Dungeons and Dragons was of great concern to evangelicals everywhere. And we were told over and over about the danger of this board game, which I had never played, but probably would have if I hadn't heard all these dire warnings. And I just made this connection in my head. This Dungeons and Dragons, this game about elves and monsters and this sort of fantastic beings. And so I assumed, well, I guess I shouldn't read Lord of the Rings anymore either, because it was the same as witches and witchcrafts and wizards and stuff. So I didn't until I got to college. And I was involved in a Christian fellowship ministry there, and someone mentioned how much they loved the Lord of the Rings books. And I just asked, wait, it's okay to read Lord of the Rings? I was still a pretty young Christian. And they said, yeah, Tolkien was a Christian. I said, what? You're kidding. And I went right back in and read the whole series of books all over again. So I don't think I would have been in love with books like I am if it hadn't been for Mr. Lang and the Lord of the Rings books early on. Yeah.
I love hearing about those wonderful teachers that do have that spark. But yes, Lord of the Rings is in my top 3 favorites. It's a world that you step into, and every time you step into it, it's richer and deeper, and I enjoy it immensely.
Right.
It's a little different than escapist fiction.
Yeah, well, certainly you can read it as escapist fiction, but
certainly.
I agree.
But there's so much to it. So, as we mentioned, you were an English major, and so was I. So let's start by clearing up the question of what English majors do. I mean, why do we study? The whole point, right, is to make us like pickier grammar snobs?
No.
Oh, phooey.
What's interesting is my English major was almost entirely literature. I don't remember. I mean, I did take some linguistics and grammar classes because I was a double major in English and education. But with the exception of one writing class, which was required, all of my credits for my English major were in the literature world. So I don't feel like I learned any grammar really directly as an English major in college. I did as an English education major, right? The education part, I sort of had to take that stuff.
You realize you're disillusioning all the homeschool parents out there who are listening to this, who imagine that is the goal of English majors? Because I'm in the same boat. I only took literature classes as well. There was no grammar offered for the English major at all. You were expected to learn to write well, and the style and manner of your writing was critiqued, but the content, came first. Okay, talk a little more about that.
Yes, can I talk a little bit more about grammar?
Please do.
What I think is, I'll just say, my favorite workshop to present at homeschool conventions is about grammar. And I call it the most fascinating discussion of grammar in the history of the world, or your money back. It's also my favorite title. And I offer the money back guarantee because it's so easy to provide the most interesting discussion of grammar anyone's ever heard, because very few people have ever heard anything remotely fascinating as it comes to grammar. So it's a low bar. But what I talk about in there a good bit is this misconception about grammar, and that's particularly common among, well, not just homeschooling families, but conservative-minded people generally. And that's this idea that there are fixed rules of grammar that we must memorize and that our language must adhere to, and that they're permanent and for all time. And the reality is the English grammar has always been evolving. I know that's a terrifying word to a lot of conservatives, but language is evolving and always has. It's why we no longer say thee and thou in everyday conversation, just as one example, right? Because over time, the way we engage with English changes and shifts. Our vocabulary changes. Words take on new meaning. New words are added. Words fall out of use. And grammar rules, punctuation, spelling rules, all those things adjust over time as well. And that can be frightening to people. I understand that, this idea that I've memorized, I've learned, I studied really hard when I was young, and I learned all the rules. And then to find out later that some of those rules can be violated can seem a little frustrating and maybe unnerving. But I've come to find that figuring grammar out, that learning to observe grammar more than to correct grammar, learning to appreciate what grammar is all about and how language works is way more challenging intellectually, but also more fun. It's just more enjoyable to think about the creative ways people use the language rather than always trying to evaluate and assess whether people are using the language correctly or not. I've never quite understood why people get so worked up about grammar errors, right? Have you ever heard people just irate over?
Oh, we have a correspondent at our local paper a few years back who for several years in a row could be relied on to point out with a great deal of wrath whatever errors he had found. And unfortunately, not all of them were actually still errors.
Right.
Books like Miss Thistlebottom's Hobgoblins.
Have not seen it.
This is a great little book about, it says, the careful writer's guide to the taboos, bugbears, and outmoded rules of English usage. But things like that can help people get past the idea that language cannot evolve and will not evolve, because if it weren't for the fact that it was a living language, we would have Latin. We might as well still all be speaking Latin.
Exactly.
Which Latin's a lovely language, and it's a delightful language to learn because it hasn't changed.
Right. I've heard it's a lovely language. I'd like to visit a Latin-speaking country one day so I could hear it. And that's right.
A pity.
Anymore.
You'll just have to visit a classical education conference and find the snobby corner. No. I really was focused on taking that. That was one reason I picked Cal State LA for my first couple of years of college, because they had a Latin program. And I really wanted to at least have a couple of years, because I read old books growing up, and that gave me a mental picture of the kind of education I wanted. An education that was steeped in classics and language and literature. And so I was out there as a teenager trying to pursue this classical education all on my own, having no clue what I was doing.
Janice, you may have been a nerd.
No, surely you don't think so.
I didn't know you then. So
I was... One of my childhood friends that lived in the neighborhood messaged me on Facebook. She found me on Facebook and she says, I remember you. You always were walking home from school and you had books all the way up to your chin and you were reading with one hand. So yes, possibly so. So if the point of an English degree is not to make you a snobbier grammar picker, how about, is it a practical degree? Sometimes it's considered impractical and outdated, despite the fact that people like Steven Spielberg and Michael Eisner were English majors and other amazing and interesting people. Mm. So what do you think? Do you need a double major in order to make it a practical degree?
That's a great question. Is it a practical degree? I don't think it is a practical degree, but I don't necessarily see the word practical as an inherently positive thing. One of my catchphrases when I teach classes, any kind of classes I've taught over the years, is the simple expression, it's good to know stuff. And all my kids learn this cornball expression, it's good to know stuff. We use it often in class. But the point of that little phrase is rooted in this way of thinking about knowledge and learning. And it tries to get at what I think is a general misunderstanding about the purpose of education in our culture. And it goes back to, I can't remember if it's Plato or Aristotle. I believe it's Plato, who talked about ends and means. That some things we pursue because they are ends in themselves, things that have, that are innately good and worthy of pursuit. And then other things that we pursue because they are means to other ends, and they're just means to get us somewhere else. So in other words, things like happiness, we pursue happiness simply because happiness is in and of itself a good thing to pursue. You don't need a reason for pursuing happiness, right? But we pursue money because money allows us to acquire other goods and services that we need. But money in and of itself, if it weren't for the ability to exchange it, it would be worthless, right? If we just had, it's why Robinson Crusoe left all the gold doubloons on the ship when he, loaded up for the island, because they weren't going to do him any good alone on a deserted island. And then, the biggest group, however, if you think about those as a Venn diagram, right? Things that we pursue as ends in themselves, and then things we pursue as means to other ends, they overlap significantly. And the truth is, there's a huge number of things we pursue in life, both because they are ends in themselves and also means to other ends. And I think the mistake we've made in our culture is we too often think of education exclusively in terms of means. We only see education as a means to some other end. And that's why we're very concerned about a practical major, right? The only consideration is, how is this going to lead me to a career one day? And I'm not suggesting that it belongs in the other circle. I'm not suggesting that knowledge or education learning is only an end in itself. I think it's just in that middle group where it's both a means to an end and also an end in itself. In other words, we do have to take some practical considerations when we're deciding on a major, right? So if we really want to be an engineer or we want to be a doctor, we need to take certain classes. You can't major in English and then want to go that route. But at the same time, there's value in knowing things that don't lead necessarily to some sort of career in the future, some means of making money. Now, you and I have discovered a way to take our English majors and actually put them to use in a way, that provides for us. And so we're in the fortunate few. But the truth is, pretty much every career in America that I can think of requires a knowledge of English.
Agreed.
Right? I mean, it's pretty broad in that sense. I think, and the names that you pointed out would attest to this, that an English major can be practical in the sense that it gives you an ability to communicate clearly and to think deeply, to read effectively. Those are skills that are necessary in a number of different careers. So it's not necessarily impractical, but it's not necessarily going to lead you to a very specific kind of career either. So it all depends on what your aim is in life.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love the comparison of the means and the ends, because you're right. It is both an end and a means.
Right.
And for
it's
us,
good to know stuff just reminds them it's an end in itself as well. It's just, when we watch Jeopardy, if you're like me, right? Every time a question comes up and I know the answer, what do you do? Okay, you shout out the answer, even if you're sitting there by yourself.
Of course.
Because there's delight in knowing the right answer. You're not going to win any money if you're watching it on TV, but you still get excited about answers that you know. Because it's good
to know stuff. I love that, because really, it's the way you make connections between people a lot of times. So it's a relationship skill, or just a relationship building thing overall. And of course, if you've ever been stuck at a party and you're an introvert, I don't know if you're an introvert, but I am. Knowing a few things does give you a little something to pass the time before the person passes out from boredom talking to you. So I suspect you're not an introvert, though.
Well, it's interesting. I've always been very extroverted, but in recent years, the older I get, the more and more I value and require alone time. I do get exhausted from social interaction, that never used to happen. I can relate at least to introverts these days because I know what it feels like to just want to get out of here. And
do you think that kids feel that way sometimes, especially kids in large families or kids who are always at activities? I mean, I know that now during COVID, a lot of kids are pulled out of their normal activities, but there's so many of the kids I know were in morning to night activities all the time. Do you think kids need downtime in order to flourish?
Well, absolutely. And it depends on the child, however. And again, I really do think we are all very varied. That's another thing I think I've learned in recent years is how fundamentally differently we're motivated as human beings. Like learning what it is that motivates my wife and how it's very different from the things that motivate me has been really helpful in our relationship. And so it's also worked with our kids as we figured out each of them have these certain things that get them really stirred up, but they're not the same one to another. And it's been helpful to figure that out. And some of that has to do with, these kids. My youngest daughter, you just need to leave her alone in the morning. She's not a morning person, but she just, what we've learned is it's who she is. It's not a flaw. She just needs, and she'll be fine, but she needs to be quiet. She needs to be not bothered and not asked a lot of questions, and give her an hour or so and she's ready to interact. But yeah, so it's just sort of getting to know your kids and then leaving room and space for the ones that really need that time.
And, that kind of goes back to the whole thing with communications as a relationship building tool. If your kids are comfortable telling you, I need an hour in the morning before I have to talk. Yes. And, when they're young, it's hard for them to communicate that. But as a communicator, you can convey those things, and parents have the power to do that. And I think recognizing that things are not flaws, they are personality things, that helps so much.
Yes, absolutely.
So you mentioned basically good, solid communication skills do make everything easier, or at least they grease the wheels of commerce and almost everything.
Yes.
Do you have any examples of where you felt that having good communication skills was particularly helpful in your life?
Oh.
And I'm springing that on you.
Totally. Yes. Yeah, I wasn't prepared for that question, but I'm always prepared for any question, Janice. You're fine.
Oh, of course.
But in particular, well, I certainly know I've learned over the years the damage that poor communication can cause, and the importance of overstating the positives and the grace, especially when communicating something difficult. Actually, this applies very well to how we go about teaching writing, how we respond to student papers. I remember years ago when I had first started teaching in an online format, and I had this one student who was an exceptional writer, and I really loved her writing, but wanted to push her to get better. And it was my first time teaching where I wasn't face-to-face interacting with the student. I was just marking her papers and sending them to her and getting her papers back. And I got a phone call one day from her mom, who was distraught. She said, Brian, my daughter is so upset. And after reading your comments on her last paper, she wants to quit. And I remember thinking, wait, what is going on? I mean, your daughter is an amazing writer. I can't even imagine what on earth did I do? And I even remember really liking the paper that she had submitted. So I went back and I said, let me call you back. I went and I looked at the comments that I had made on her paper. And I realized that I had sort of assumed that she knew me and assumed that she knew my tone of voice and knew when I was teasing her and knew that I was just pushing her to get better, all with this in this context where her writing is great. I just want to make you better. But as I sort of pulled back and tried to read it objectively, I realized that I didn't actually say any of those things. And my attempts at humor came across as sort of snarky and critical. And I didn't commend very much in the paper at all. It was a big learning lesson, life learning lesson for me is well, you really can't just assume people know the positive things that you think about them. Like obviously there's application beyond teaching writing, right? Just the way we interact with people. Sometimes we feel a certain way, but we don't communicate it. We just assume it's clear. So yeah, that would be one way that.
That's a terrific example because, I do talk to a lot of parents who are really nervous about evaluating their kids' writing. And the only thing they're comfortable evaluating, they go through with their red pen and mark all the commas that are out of place or things like that. And they don't talk about style or content or organization or any of those things. They just basically proofread the paper. But, I've talked to them for so much. I wrote them a little book called Evaluate Writing the Easy Way.
Yes.
But what do you tell parents who find this whole evaluation thing hard? I think the compliment sandwich or the criticism sandwich or whatever is a very good thing because, you do have to sandwich things.
Yep. Well, of course, I tell them to buy Janice Campbell's book is what I tell them.
There you go. Perfect.
And if they've bought that already, then I tell them to take a WriteAtHome course. Yeah. That's actually one of the things that makes us a little different from at least most homeschool curriculums out there is many homeschool writing curriculums are designed to help moms be excellent writing teachers, which is appropriate, right? These are homeschoolers we're talking to. But WriteAtHome has always been a little different. We're basically the place you go when you just don't want to be the writing teacher, or if you just don't feel capable of being the writing teacher. It's a way to outsource the teaching of writing. And we found that's a need as well. If there are moms out there just don't feel confident or comfortable, even if it's just 1 year or two, just to have a break to let somebody else do that. So that's sort of our approach. But what we do, we have a little, I'll give you a quick summary of my 4-point secret to marking a student paper. Okay. I'll do this super fast because I do a whole workshop on this, but the way we train our writing coaches is we ask them to make 4 types of comments on every paper. And as long as you do all 4 of these types of comments, you can feel pretty good that you've done a good job of marking the paper. So the first one is a positive comments. So find things that your student is doing well and point them out and state specifically why it's good or excellent. Because students don't always know when they do things right. Lots of writing is intuitive and instinctive, and they're not consciously making the decisions. And so by pointing them out, you draw their attention to the things that they're doing well. It also convinces students that they're capable of growing as a writer. That's really, really important. If students don't believe they can write, you're never going to see any growth. So you have to be positive. You have to believe, and you have to get students to believe that there's a writer inside them that you're just helping to emerge over time. So that's the positive comment. The second thing is critical comments, which I call corrective directive comments. So corrective / directive. So in other words, it's not enough to just mark errors. We want to mark the error in a way that the student knows how to correct the error. That's the directive part, right? So sometimes I remember getting papers back from parents that would just say, or from teachers when I was in school, and would just, have a large section just marked vague. And I was like, what is it wasn't vague to me when I wrote it. I don't know. How do I fix vague? Right. Or awkward. That was the other one. Actually, they would just write awk with a period, which is a horrible, horrible sound. Right.
It is.
Awk.
Sounds like a vulture.
My favorite one was when they would write, frag. Right? Did you ever get that?
Right. Oh, yes. Frags.
Right. Okay. So I didn't write a complete sentence, and you can't even write a complete word to correct my.
Right.
So corrective directive comments, and those predominate, right? So normally in a paper, most of the comments you make are going to be corrective directive, but you definitely want as many positive comments as possible. The third comment that we have our writing coaches make, and this is sort of our little trade secret, is what we call not much of a secret since I'm telling everybody, but it's what we call relational comments.
Yeah.
And that is every paper that they get, they're asked to make one comment that they're just responding to something a student has said. And they're not correcting anything. They're not pointing out anything about the writing itself. They're just reacting. So if a student says something funny, They'll just say, ha ha, this made me laugh. Or they go to a baseball game and you write, I'm a Phillies fan, boo Red Sox or something like that. But it's an attempt to make kids understand that I'm not just correcting your grammar. I'm not just correcting your writing. I'm actually listening to what you have to say. And I'm a real person who's hearing you and listening to you. And I don't just care that you get it correct. I care about what you have to say as well. And we find that makes a huge difference in how students receive our feedback. And then the fourth comment, you reminded me of it, is a summary comment, which we sort of put several sentences at the end of every paper, and we use the sandwich model, something positive, something needing work, and then something positive to wrap it up. So if you've got those four things, we feel like you've done a really sufficient job of working on a student paper every time. Positive comments, corrective, directive comments, relational comments, and a summary comment. There you go. Did that fast.
Awesome. I love it. And that's basically the kind of things that I do with student papers as well, because when I was in college, I had one teacher who was absolutely wonderful with feedback. And it made such a difference to me because I really wanted to improve as a writer.
Right.
And of course we're writing about great literature. And I mean, seriously, could anything be more fun than writing about great literature and becoming a better writer at the same time? As I enjoyed his comments, and they basically taught me, they were a model for how to evaluate in this way. And it makes all the difference in the world, because that's where I started. I started out doing evaluations by email.
Right.
Very long ago, because as a, homeschooling mom, there's not many ways that you're going to find to earn a little bit of extra income as well as, and I thoroughly enjoyed doing it, at least for a season in life. I won't say that something I want to do forever, but it is something that parents can learn how to do, because if you give constructive criticism that helps the student grow, and the student feels like you are on their team, you are walking that journey with them, and you want them to succeed, and you're giving them tools, giving them a writer's handbook or whatever to help them learn to look things up so that they go off to college, they're equipped.
Yes.
I cannot, I just don't want students to be completely dependent on me or whatever, but good evaluations, as you've talked about, those four things, it gives students tools, because as you give them, especially the corrective directive type of comments, they start seeing things that they do well. So that's good.
Glad you liked it.
Yeah. I figured when I, emailed you to see about whether you'd come and do a podcast, that we probably wouldn't have a lot of huge areas of disagreement on strategy. Because I know, I've seen you at all the conference, not all the conferences, but a lot of the conferences. And of course, the title, the grammar workshop, has always intrigued me. And I always wanted to get away and attend one of those, because it did sound absolutely delightful. And
it's my favorite.
Yeah, I can see. So as we come toward the end, is there anything else you want to talk about? I have one last question at the very end.
Sure. I'd like to, let's talk about books again, and English major and literature. Since English majors were all about studying books, and it's not practical. One thing I don't think I didn't mention was, why read literature? Because I've encountered a number of folks over the years who find that whole idea to be impractical, right? And why read works of fiction? What's the practical application of reading, Hamlet and Dickens, and so it's tricky. I remember being asked that when I was a young teacher in the public school. Mr. Wasko, why do I have to know this? And I learned eventually to say, because it's good to know stuff. I mean, that's true. But I didn't have a really clear way to articulate why. Like, why should we study works of literature? And because it's not practical. You're not going to use it later in life, right? I mean,
unless you're a speechwriter.
True. Yeah. Because I remember we were studying actually a Shakespearean sonnet when the student asked me, why do we need to know this? And I think actually what I said was, it might help you pick up chicks one day, or something like that.
Right.
I guess actually might be a practical application for particular sonnets.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But other than that, literature is art, right? It's beauty. It's immersing ourselves in the experiences of others and the thoughts and ideas and worldviews of other people. And if you choose the right books, brilliant people who have a unique view of the world. That's so when I tell my kids that I teach literature to, because I also teach online literature courses, I honestly believe that reading and studying literature makes us better people. Not better than other people, but better than the people we were before we read literature. That exposing ourselves to, the great books throughout literary history widen us, sort of broaden us in our experience of life and ideas and people, right? So I feel like I'm a better person because I've met Don
I'm
Quixote.
Certain that I'm a better person because I've read, and fiction especially. And, for the people who feel like you have to quantify everything, studies have been done to show that you become a more empathetic person. Yeah. Just the whole, starting in childhood, children who read are more empathetic. And then on into adulthood, different studies have shown that. Yeah. Another interesting study was the influence on family culture. Family scholarly culture was a great study that I enjoyed reading, in which they found out that just the presence of 500 books in a home would increase the child's academic performance to the equivalent of a child who had postdoctoral parents in the house, post-grad parents in the house.
Wow.
Even if the parents themselves had less than a high school education, if they had brought in books, read to their children, taught the children to read and grow. So for the people looking for quantifying the value of books, there are resources. Yeah. But I just have had, as you say, your soul stretched, your mind expanded. We can travel to different times, places, periods in history, all of the interesting things. Meet amazing.
Can I recommend a book real quick for parents who might be interested in this idea? It's a book I read a couple years ago. It's by a college professor named Karen Swallow Pryor. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Yes.
Until recently, she was a professor at Liberty University, and she just started at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, is where she's teaching now. But she's written several books. This was my favorite of hers. It's called Booked Literature in the Soul of Me. And it's her memoir of sorts. It's sort of her literary memoir. It takes you through her journey to faith from sort of faith as a young Christian growing up in a Christian home who wandered then away from faith, but was drawn back ultimately to faith through classic works of literature. And she spends chapter by chapter talking about the books themselves, and but not just the book per se, but the book's effect on her and how it began opening her mind. And these weren't works of Christian literature; they were just famous, well-known works of literature like Pride and Prejudice and David Copperfield, or those kinds of things that opened her eyes and began her asking questions that have ultimately led her back to faith. But it's a really wonderful book on the value of literature, especially just to the Christian.
Okay, I'm excited to hear that, because that book is in my to be read pile, which it has moved up and down. I think I'll have to move it up a little.
Fairly short read too. You can get through it fast. So.
Good. I have a plane trip coming up next month, so maybe that'll be a perfect book to take along. So that's a really good recommendation to, for our fellow homeschool parents, because I think I do get a lot of math and science people stopping at my booth at the conferences saying, I do not, we've been doing your program and it's great. I can do it because it's logical and it's laid out. But their comment always is, I didn't realize what books would do for my kids. And that's an interesting thing, because a lot of times you get all the way through high school and you've never read a full-length classic work.
So I taught in public schools for 10 years. And it's in a very sort of urban, low-income school. And I loved it, honestly. It was a great experience, but I was so frustrated at my inability to get through reading material with my kids. So we had a textbook and we would read poetry and short stories in class when it was possible. But these kids just wouldn't read when I sent books home, which means there just wasn't much time to get through books. So typically every year we would read one, possibly two short novels together. We would just read them, several days a week. We would take a portion of the class to just read out loud. It took us a really long time to get through books that way, but that was the best I could do. So in the course of an entire year, maybe 2 books in an English class, which is about reading and literature. And it was so frustrating. And one of the things I love about teaching online, teaching through a Wasko Lit and WriteAtHome program, is I feel like it's structured in a way that makes way more sense than classroom education, where I've got them for 50 minutes a day and they're staring and looking at me, and I've got to fill in 50 minutes of time, and they're listening to me or watching a video or, doing worksheets or some kind of activities for 50 minutes. But what they're not doing is reading, right? And the way I teach it now, students spend 4 days or 5 days reading. And then 1 day a week, we get together and we talk about what they're reading. And as a result, we're getting through massive numbers of books, 14 or 15 classic works of literature every single year. These kids come out, in their first year with me, they've read the Iliad and the Odyssey and, 5 Greek plays and the Aeneid and Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis, which I throw in there. And a really impressive assortment of books just in 1 year, because it's not about me or what I have to say about the books. It's about the books themselves. And look, they're going to learn a lot more from Socrates and from Homer and from Virgil than they are from Brian Wasko. So it's pretty fun to be able to do it the what I think is I don't know if it's the right way, but it's the best way. It's at least a better way than.
I think it's the only way to teach literature, to have students fall in love with it.
Yes.
I think you cannot present them fragments and expect them to fall in love. Some of them, there'll be a few who maybe go and pursue the whole work. But to have a student fall in love, they need the whole thing. And the discussion piece makes it so incredibly helpful. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to ask just one of those leading questions. Sure. So for your discussions, do you have them take it apart and identify all the parts, like this is the protagonist and the antagonist and all of that stuff? Or do you discuss the story?
Yeah, we discuss the story. We do some analysis. We talk about theme and talk about character development and plot and these kinds of things when it's appropriate. But let me give you another little philosophical comment. Something that I think is another big mistake that English teachers make. And I was guilty as well when I was teaching in the public school. And that's that we, in those days, I used literature to teach literary terms. Right. So there's a chapter in the book on plot, and then there's all these short stories and stuff. And you read these things in order to give them examples of introduction and conflict and climax and et cetera. In other words, as though the point were to teach these kids these terms. And so we use the literature. And so that's completely backwards. Right. So the way I teach literature now is we do discuss terms, but only in the context of the work, right? We use terms because they help us to better appreciate what a writer is doing. And if they don't serve that purpose, then I don't care. I don't care if you know what the term is, unless it's going to help you, better understand or appreciate the literature that you're reading. So use terms to teach the literature. Don't use literature to teach the terms. That's my tip.
That's exactly what I would do as well, because I really never understood all the terminology of poetry. We went through reams of worksheets about it,
right,
which did absolutely nothing. But what helped me to understand meter and rhyme and all of the different things and find the different literary devices within poetry and literature was simply just reading a lot. And you start seeing patterns, you start seeing things crop up, you even start perceiving the differences in literary periods and how types of poetry changed and evolved and all of those things. And so it becomes so that you can look at a new poem or a poem that you've seen and kind of immediately slot it in its correct historical position, even if you don't have a name of the poet.
Right.
And it's like becoming familiar with a new group of friends.
Yes.
You don't just harp on their names. You try to get to know them, and then you kind of remember them. You remember that they like to read, or they have cats, or they, whatever. So
I don't give any tests.
I'm so happy about that.
We do quizzes. I have them do a sort of a comprehension quiz at the end of each reading assignment, and they do other things for grades, but I don't test them on dates and names. And I always felt when I had to create tests for literature, I just thought this is just not what it's about. Like, I just don't want them memorizing stuff.
Right. No, it's a distraction from the point, which is understanding and entering into the work of literature.
Right.
And really, as they're starting to observe and see the different literary devices in use and recognize them, they're going to be able to use those in their own writing. All those worksheets that you can assign them to do will never get them using the things in their writing. The onomatopoeia or whatever it happens to be is not going to show up because they're going to be strangers, but within the literature, they're friends. So
agree. We are kindred spirits.
I think so. Okay. So I've kept you for a while. I think we're moving on toward an hour. So I have one last question.
Okay.
Is there a book that you think every young person should own?
Yes. Well, no, there are many books that every young person should own.
Pick one.
How young?
Oh, you can give me one for different ages if you like, a couple of different ones.
Okay. All right. Here's. Well, actually, I don't have a copy of it, but for here, I think if I had to pick one, I don't know why this one occurred to me recently, but especially for younger kids, I would pick Shel Silverstein's "Where the Sidewalk Ends" as sort of an introduction to the joys of poetry, especially if you have boys that you want to intrigue with the idea of poetry, because he writes poetry about, pimples and belching and lots of boyish stuff. And his poems are witty and clever and brilliant and in most cases hilarious. Super talented guy. So yeah, I think that would be one for the younger ones. I don't know if that'd be on everybody's list, but
I love that. Yeah. It goes well with Hilaire Belloc's funny poetry for kids too. The Beasts, and was it Matilda? Anyway. Yeah. Hilaire Belloc is another good.
Great.
Who else? Now, what other book?
For slightly older kids, this is probably cliche, but the Chronicles of Narnia. Every middle schooler, young high schooler needs to read the Chronicles of Narnia. Actually, what's great about the Chronicles of Narnia is you can read them to your children when they're much younger, and then have them read them again when they get older, and it's an entirely different experience, right? Which is exactly what we did with our kids. Still remember reading them when they were very little, curled up in bed. And then they got older and read them again, and they were like, "Dad, this is brilliant. I didn't even know."
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Good memories.
Yeah. So then, of course, all the classic stuff. I teach all the classic stuff, so I don't know how to pick from those. Right, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and Shakespeare, all the way through. It's hard to pick one.
I know. It's such a mean and unreasonable thing to ask an English person, literature.
G.K. Chesterton was once asked, if you were stranded on a deserted island, what one book would he want with him? Have you heard his answer?
Yes. I don't remember.
A Practical Guide to Shipbuilding was his choice.
That's probably a good plan.
Classic Chesterton.
I love Chesterton. He's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Any last things you would like to share?
No, this has been great. Thank you so much for hosting this. This has been fun.
I'm glad you
used to the Zoom COVID things, the world of Zoom these days.
I know. At least we're not having to do this on the phone. There's nothing worse than having to talk on the phone for an extended period of time because I immediately lose the thread.
Right. You know what? Let me say one other thing. I will say this, that one of the things that we began doing last year because of the epidemic or the pandemic is I started offering it started out once a month and went to once a week toward the end of the year, but free webinars that I call WriteAtHome Plus webinars. And it's just, we pick a Wednesday evening. They're designed for teens, and we cover topics like creative writing or writing essays or writing college application essays, grammar, or we'll talk about literature and various approaches to reading. And it's just a fun time. And I was shocked because I had a really, really good turnout every single time, even though they were sort of academic titles. I'd have 100 to 150 students show up every Wednesday. So if people watching are interested, go to WriteAtHome.com, and we'll be making announcements on there for the WriteAtHome Plus webinars. They're free, just whatever you like to do with them. No tests, no quizzes.
That sounds like fun. Can other English majors sort of hang around the fringes and listen?
Absolutely. Moms and dads are welcome.
Oh, that sounds like such a great idea. I'm so glad you're doing that. I mean, people need some fun around books.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of lots of ways to have fun with books, but they don't always involve crowds. But sometimes for these kids that are especially craving a bit of interaction, that sounds perfect.
We did book clubs too, actually, where I'd pick a book and we'd just meet and talk about the book. Free book club by Zoom.
I like that.
Great.
Yeah, can't miss it. Okay, so it's been fun talking with you very much. And catching up with a fellow bibliophile is probably the best. And I'm sure our listeners have enjoyed it too. And so if you want to connect with Brian, go to WriteAtHome.com, and you can connect with me, Janice Campbell, at everydayeducation.com. We both hope you'll stop by for visits. And thank you for listening. And goodbye.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Homeschool Solutions Show. As always, you can find show notes and links to all the resources mentioned at homeschooling.mom. I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, and if it was especially meaningful to you, share it with your friends via email or social media. This is just another way we can all encourage and love and support one another. Speaking of love and support, we are so grateful for the support of our sponsors. Have you joined us at one of the Great Homeschool Conventions? The Great Homeschool Conventions are the homeschooling events of the year, offering outstanding speakers, hundreds of workshops covering today's top parenting and homeschooling topics, and the largest homeschool curriculum exhibit halls in the U.S. Find out more at greathomeschoolconventions.com. I hope to see you there, but in the meantime, let's gather together again here on the podcast next week.